The Healthcare Security Cast is sponsored by 3D Network Technology. Reliability is our core value. Visit www.3dnetworktechnology.com. And by Genetec, delivering security strategies for healthcare. Visit Genetec, that's GENETEC.com. And by the Change Execution Group. Visit 360lifetransformations.com. Before we get into today's show, I want to invite you to connect with the Healthcare Security Cast on a new platform. It's a text-based platform called Community. To join, all you have to do is text my community number, and that number is 647-372-2042. That number again is 647-372-2042. The first message is automated. It's just to get you set up and added into the system. Everything after that will be direct engagement with me. This platform will allow you to stay up to date on everything that we're doing on the Healthcare Security Cast, as well as engage with me one-on-one. Also, as we move forward, there'll be other opportunities to connect with study groups and special interest groups. Your information is kept private, and you can opt out at any time by simply texting STOP. Again, to join, just text JOIN to 647-372-2042. That's 647-372-2042. Right now, text messages can only be received from Canada and the U.S.
Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast, the podcast dedicated to healthcare security, safety, and emergency management. If you are involved with a healthcare security program or desire to be, this podcast is for you. Join the conversation as we discuss the issues that matter to healthcare security professionals while leveraging the expertise of healthcare security thought leaders and experts in personal development. And now, here's your host, Brian Hamilton.
Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast for Tuesday, August the 25th, 2020. Today I have the pleasure of being joined by Mark Moore. Mark, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And I always like to start off by learning about our guests. So I will start with the question, who is Mark Moore?
Well, professionally, you know, I'm the Chief Security Officer at Dayton Children's Hospital in Dayton, Ohio. But much more importantly, I'm the incredibly lucky husband of a beautiful, and you've seen my face, Bryn, the listeners can't, clearly a legally blind wife. The dad to four really unique and different and wonderful kids, and the doting grandfather to two grandkids. I could still smack my oldest daughter for making me a grandfather far before my time. But I guess the comment on the Marine Corps says that there's no such thing as an ex-Marine or a former Marine. So I am a Marine. I did 10 years of active duty and loved being a Marine. And when it stopped being fun, I found something else to do. And I guess just on a career kind of path, I have led training teams and consulting groups and protective operations in 73 countries and 49 states, I think it is. My kids used to keep a map with pins in it, and they ran out of pins. So
that's really cool. And the one thing that you mentioned was the CSO, and I think that was a recent promotion. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is clearly the leadership of the hospital and the C-suite, or as we call them, the senior leadership team. They were distracted by COVID, and they let me slip in under the wire and made it messed up and promoted me. But I haven't told them they messed up, so hopefully they're not going to listen to this.
Well, by hook or by crook, you're there. So
That's
congratulations, right. and congratulations on that accomplishment.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. As we used to say as drill instructors, if you're not cheating, you're not trying.
No, and you mentioned having four kids. I'm in the same boat. I have four kids as well, and it's funny, like you mentioned, how different they are. Four individuals, even though they grew up in the same house with the same parents. Even two of mine are twins, but they're so different, and there's so many lessons just in having kids that you can take away and apply to other areas of life as well.
It really is amazing. My 17-year-old son is an athlete, and he decided 4 years ago that he needed to get bigger and stronger. And so we converted our garage into a weight room. And I have learned far more in these 4 years than he has, I can assure you.
Nice. Now, you touched on your career path, and you have had an interesting career path. What has led to you being involved in healthcare security today? Well, I guess let's go from the start of your career till now. What's happened in between there?
Well, I think as far as getting into healthcare security, there are a bunch of people who knew me as a Marine, and particularly as a Marine drill instructor, and folks who knew me as a world famous bodyguard. And I use air quotes because that's not a term I came up with. One of my former bosses in that world coined that phrase about us. But there are a bunch of folks in those worlds that would never believe that Martin Moore could work in a kinder, gentler pediatric hospital in the Midwest. So there has certainly been a lot of mellowing that's gone on. Most recently, before I came here, I worked for an ultra high net worth family, and they recognized when they hired me that I already had the security chops, and they made it very clear they weren't interested in paying me any money or paying other people money so I could go train to shoot and drive and all that cool guy stuff. They poured money into my instruction so that I could learn how to be a businessman whose business was security. And obviously that was just an astronomical gift to me and a huge accelerator to my career. It really took me out of that bodyguard, dignitary, executive family protection world and prepared me for being a generalist. And as you well know, in the healthcare space, we are certainly generalists. Every single day, we may have something new from some different category of the security world, some little niche. And, even though there's no way we can know everything about it, if it's something that we've touched, it's something that we've done. If it's something that we know somebody who's an expert to ask, we can probably, work our way through it. So that was the most recent thing. And fortunately their philanthropy is amazing. And they are the biggest benefactors to Dayton Children's Hospital. And so at the time that family was kind of, the patriarch and matriarch were kind of downsizing and slowing down, and I was ready for a new challenge. It turned out that Dayton Children's was looking for someone who could handle enterprise security risk management for, I guess we got about 3,400 employees, give or take, depending on, furloughs and rifts with COVID, and 23 sites in 17 legal jurisdictions. I spent my whole first month on the job meeting chiefs of police and sheriffs in every little town and county we touched. But, they really prepared me for this job, and I'm glad they did. It was a wonderful gift that they gave me by kind of getting my mind out of that little myopic world of protection and opening up the broader scheme of both broad-based security generalism and business.
Awesome. Now, you've highlighted that family as being one of your biggest supporters, obviously, that you've had throughout your career. Who were some of the mentors and influencers and supporters that you've had throughout your career?
Oh man, in the military, my greatest mentor was a colonel named Wayne Morris. He still lives in Jacksonville, North Carolina, outside Camp Lejeune. His call sign was Lobo. He's an old Vietnam era Force Recon Marine, and he went from private to colonel, and he was a leader in the finest traditions of Marine Corps leadership. And when he was the provost marshal at Camp Lejeune, which is like the chief of police on a Marine Corps installation, on a military installation, he tabbed me as his special reaction team leader, like the military version of a SWAT team. And he challenged me to go learn how to do and become the duty expert at a bunch of things that I wasn't really that experienced in. And then it was like having 13 little brothers who would literally run through a wall for me by the time we learned all that and taught all that and trained all that. So working for him was quite an experience, and he was old school enough that it was a lot of fun too. In the civilian side, Dave Johnson, whose call sign was Archer, was my biggest mentor. Dave's an old soldier, and he literally wrote the original doctrine for the Army's Protective Services course, which within the military is the go-to school for all branches of the service to go for the military personnel who protect the Joint Chiefs, the leaders of each particular branch of the service. So Dave took in this old Marine off the streets 3 separate times in my career, and we've worked together in myriad different ways and projects and relationships. He's been my boss. We've been partners. We've been contractors together. We've kind of always gravitated back to each other. And I will say that when we were business partners, he used to introduce me. There was 3 soldiers and myself that were partners in a business. And when Dave would introduce me, he'd say, it's really embarrassing for me to say that the Marine in our company is the best writer of the bunch. He was also honest, which was good. But, Dave and I have been in a few situations that were maybe a little too exciting for our own good. And we've literally done projects on 6 continents together. So I learned a great deal from him. And one of the things I think I learned from him was that I already knew a lot, and I should trust my instincts about what I knew, but he certainly taught me a lot as well. And then within the healthcare security space, one of the former guests on your podcast, Dan Yaross at Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio, right down the road from us, has just been a wonderful supporter and help. He took me in right off the bat when I got this job and shared his program with me and shared policies and procedures and made not only himself but also his people available. And not a lot of folks will do that. He's a real pro, and he's been a huge help to me as well.
Yeah, Dan, definitely a great guy. Definitely someone who I've been able to learn from, and I've really enjoyed serving on the board with him. Again, just a great guy, and I had a feeling too that you were going to mention that his name was going to come up, because I know how involved he is with IAHSS and just helping people. He's just that kind of guy.
Yeah, no ego. And mentioning IAHSS, that's where you and I met very briefly in Chicago in 2018. And one of the amazing things about the organization is that, as we talked about before this, I've been to conferences and conventions, and I've spoken and instructed and presented and all that stuff that we all do as we get gray hair. I know you don't have any, but the rest of us as we get gray hair. But going to that conference in Chicago, I was amazed at how collegial and competent and confident everybody was. And there was no chest thumping, or as the previously mentioned Dave Johnson would say, there wasn't any butt sniffing going on. So people were eager to help the newbie. And I was, I couldn't even hide how little I knew. I was brand new. I was 3 or 4 days into the job when I went to that conference. And everybody was willing to help, to introduce me to somebody, to tell me about a product, to tell me about a vendor. And it was 3 or 4 days of just being a sponge and trying to take it all in. And I met a bunch of great folks there who have continued to be of help. And hopefully someday I'll know enough about all this healthcare security stuff to help them too.
No, that's it's funny that you mentioned that. You were 3 or 4 days in when you attended that conference. That must have been like drinking through a fire hose, because that was one of the biggest ones. That was, obviously the 50th anniversary.
It really was, and it was cold and it was snowy,
yes.
Which probably helped because I didn't go anywhere. I just stayed inside and tried to talk to people and learn. But I was really amazed. Everybody I introduced myself to, I said, I'm 4 days into this and I know nothing. And people just literally, pulled the top of my head off and poured knowledge in, and it was great. And I'm not sure I left there with, knowing what I was going to do about our program, but I certainly knew where to look and who to call and who to ask and who the go-to people were. And I was just incredibly amazed at how little ego and how much professionalism and kindness there was in that group. And I have continued to find that to be true within, it's a mouthful, IAHSS. I have to slow down and say it every time. But and it's of all the kind of security groups and organizations and stuff that we find ourselves in over time, it's my favorite.
Awesome. Now, as someone who transitioned to healthcare, and you touched on this when mentioning IAHSS, you transitioned very recently, 2018. What are some of the things that you found helped you throughout your transition?
Well, being willing to listen for sure, and being eager to ask good people and finding good people to ask for help. But IAHSS has been a constant source of information and guidelines and structure, and even the things that we don't end up implementing that I read or that I learn, or when I go to local chapters, I still negative learning is still learning. And even if I learn something that I don't want to do, that helps me pinpoint what I do want to do. So all of that has been very helpful. And then I was really, really lucky. You mentioned the promotion. Up until a few days ago, I was the director of public safety. I've now been able to promote my security manager and make him the director of public safety as I become the CSO. And I inherited an amazing guy. His name's Toney. He is now the director of public safety. His whole career has been in fire and law enforcement and EMT and hospital security. And he is a wealth of information. And he treated me very kindly, even after he realized I didn't know what I was doing. And he gave me time to figure it out. So he's been great. And then, I work for a VP, Cindy Berger is her name, and she is a career nurse, and she's been at Dayton Children's Hospital her whole career, and she's now the vice president of experience. And she tells it like it is, and she demanded that I learn quickly, but she also accepted that I didn't know it all coming in the door, and that I had enough experience that I could probably figure it out. And working for her has just been fabulous. So I hope she's listening, not the rest of the senior leadership.
Awesome. No, it's always good to have leadership that has the patience to allow you to learn and make mistakes and grow throughout your career. So that's great that you've had that experience.
I've had more good leaders than bad, but fortunately I've learned a little bit from the bad ones too.
Yeah, no, and that's what it's all about, right? Like taking all the experiences and being able to learn from all of them, whether they're good or bad.
Well, for sure. I think I mentioned to you that, my dad, who was a Marine officer, a Marine lawyer, my dad taught me as a young kid, you can learn something from any idiot. And that may not be a politically correct way to say it, but I found that it was true. When I was in drill instructor school at Parris Island, in my estimation, in my opinion, the least intelligent, least effective of the drill instructors taught me the most important lesson I learned, and it was one sentence: don't reinvent the wheel. And he said, be a copycat. Figure out who in your company is doing what's working and do that until you figure out how to apply your own personality to it. And that was the best advice I got in 3 years at Parris Island. In my early Marine Corps career, I worked for two leaders who were everything I didn't want to become. They were sarcastic and they were disrespectful, and they fed off of each other's negative energy every day. And I dealt with that every day for several years, and promised myself that I wouldn't become that kind of leader. And I hope that my former and current employees would agree that young Lance Corporal Moore has lived up to that promise. But
yeah, I'm sure they do. It's funny though, you mentioned that very ineffective, you said least intelligent instructor probably that you had encountered. Hopefully he's not listening either, because that's
well, I didn't say his name, and there were 9 of them, so they'll all think it was somebody else.
Yeah, you know what? That's true. That's a very valid point. Hopefully he doesn't remember giving you that advice.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, he gave it to like 62 of us in a room, so I think I'm okay. I think I'm safe. Of course, he was so fit he could probably still run 3 miles in 18 minutes today, and that's been a long time ago.
All right. Well, one of the challenges that we have in our industry is achieving the training requirements, especially given the 24/7 nature of what we do. What have your findings been as far as challenges and concerns regarding meeting those requirements?
Oh man, you said a mouthful. Training is our biggest challenge. And when I was in the military, training is an expected part of every person's job, every rank, every location, every unit, no matter the size of the unit, whether it's the smallest unit you have or the big parent unit. In the civilian world and the contractor world, doing, protective services and consulting and training, operations are ongoing, and it's very hard to have the time and the budget to do the training that you need to do. And because somebody always has to be doing the protection or the security or the training or the consulting, it's very, very difficult to train as a team. And obviously that is also true in healthcare. With our public safety department at Dayton Children's, we have really found that it's difficult. We know we need all of our personnel to work all 40 hours that they're working on the public safety schedule every week to make the schedule work. And if we get a couple of extra people sick, or with COVID and we have to change the schedule, we really need everybody, and we may have to incur overtime just to cover the schedule. So then to go to the additional expense of overtime and time away from work for the public safety officers and for the instructors is a challenge. But what we decided to do, Bryn, is we totally sold out to in-house training. We pretty much did away with either going somewhere and getting trained or having some duty expert come train us. And we also did away with, quite frequently what we do is we bite off week-long chunks of training. And then what that means is, in our case, 3 shifts instead of 3 8-hour shifts. Now for a whole week, we've got 2 12-hour shifts while 1 shift is training. So what we've tried to do is move to the first year I was here, we did spend quite a bit of money sending folks out to become instructors and getting them instructor certifications and then letting them come back and teach within the department. The other thing we've done is we tried very hard to teach the high liability issues just in 1-day chunks instead of week-long chunks. So like 1-day bites, if you will. So our experience is that means that the instructors are able to have more dynamic training because they're just preparing for 1 day. The instructors don't get burned out because they're not training. I mean, when you're training 8 or 10 hours in a day, it's a 12 to 14-hour day to set up and ramp down and prepare for the next day. So the instructors aren't getting burned out, and the students, the officers and the sergeants and the lieutenants aren't getting bored with the training. They look forward to it, and it's in a 1-day bite. It also means that we're able to do it. We kind of, when we do it in 1-week chunks, we kind of do it once a year, and then we consider ourselves done. In the 1-day bites, we've been able to really double our training frequency. So, for instance, firearms were being trained once a year. Now we're training firearms twice a year, every year. So, just as one example, so that has really worked out for us. It was, I think, it was a good decision. We've made it work, and fortunately, the aforementioned senior leadership team has understood that, unlike clinical personnel, we can't really train in our competencies during the workday. We can't take a bunch of public safety officers to an unused exam room and practice what we do. We have to go somewhere else, and we have to do that in private most of the time. So they've understood that, and they've understood that because we need everybody for that 40-hour schedule, we're going to incur overtime for instructors and for students. So each year we've been able to build a little bit more. There's never enough. That's not a complaint. It's just a statement of fact. There's never enough money, and there's never enough time to do all the training we would like to do to make people better, or as much better as they need to be. But we feel like it's really been a benefit. And as you well know, folks are much more eager to train and to teach when they're making time and a half instead of just their regular pay. So that doesn't hurt motivation either.
No, I know when I was a guard, I used to look for the training that happened on my weekends off so I could get the extra overtime. It obviously it helps. Every little bit helps especially when you have a young family. It all goes a long way.
No doubt.
Now, one of the things that you mentioned is that kind of stuck out for me was that all of your team is doing 40-hour weeks, doing 8-hour shifts. I recently listened to an interview with Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, where he talked about the impact of 12-hour shifts and just what it does to people who are in law enforcement or in a related field like security. But he kind of broke it down, and this was what really made it hit home for me was after a certain amount of hours, he was comparing it to a blood alcohol level. Now, yeah, it obviously has an impact, especially with your people handling firearms. There's obviously an added concern there. Was that part of the thinking in the rotation that you have, or was that something that was just kind of in place when you came in? What are some of your thoughts on 8-hour shifts versus 12-hour shifts in the healthcare environment?
Well, I've heard exactly the same stuff that you mentioned, and that has always been my experience. We all, when we're troops, to use the Marine Corps vernacular, when we're officers, we all like 12-hour shifts better because we don't have to come to work as many days in the week to get our 40. We get more days off. We may get 2 or even 3 meals in our shift instead of just one. And all those things from a comfort level are great. And I'm not blind to that many times most of our folks would rather work 12s. But when I came in, I inherited the 8-hour shift schedule. it was working. Some of our senior leaders within the public safety department really, really pushed hard to go to 12s. And I agreed that we would do that on a trial basis if some things happened, particularly around communications, because one of my experiences, like I said, I've got a lot of gray hair. I've been doing this a long time. One of my experiences with 12-hour shifts is that we rush through roll call. We rush through the handover because I've been here 12 and I'm ready to go home, and you're going to be here 12 and you don't want to see me. You want to just get your shift started. And the first thing that happens is that communication deteriorates. And so I made it contingent on the fact that we have a very robust roll call pass down process. We communicate a lot. We don't to our officers through roll call, because that may be the only time they get it. They may spend an entire shift and never once look at email. They may never once be on the phone. It may be just the job and their radio the whole shift. So instantly, when we went on that trial period, communication degraded as I had feared that it would. But it was a good practice for us. I can't claim any great clairvoyance, but it was a good practice for us, because the way we ramped it up was very logical, and the way we ramped it back down was very logical when we got over that trial period, and I was convinced that it wasn't going to work. Of course, that frustrated some folks around here. But when we had to ramp up to 12s for COVID, because all of a sudden there were so many more posts, there were now screening stations that we had to man with public safety officers where we hadn't before. There was a drive-up testing site that we hadn't had to man before. So we had very quickly to go through 12s, but the whole department had practiced ramping up to 12s. So that helped us. A lot of folks in the department really would have loved to have stayed on 12s after we kind of got things back to the new normal. And I just wasn't willing to do that because 8s work so well. And the one thing they don't see in themselves and each other that Andre, as I mentioned, the former security manager, now director of public safety, Andre and I noticed day in and day out with the 12s was that last 3 hours, people were just hanging on. And it is really, as Colonel Grossman says, it's like that blood alcohol content. Their emotions are saturated. As we would say in the South, their give-a-care is saturated. And that last 3 hours, man, they're just hanging on for dear life. So it's great for family time, and it's great to have more days off, and it's great not to have to drive, to your place of work as many times in a week. But the performance level and the communication level just drop off so significantly, in my opinion, that we've decided to stick with 8s during normal operations. And now we've had good practice twice. If we need to ramp up to 12s and ramp back down from 12s, the department can do that pretty easily because they've been through it with me and they know what I expect.
Awesome. Now, just for my curiosity, do your staff rotate shifts? Like, will they do a week of nights and a week of days, or do you mix it up like that, or are they just on the shifts that they're on?
We don't.
Perfect.
There is when people leave the department, there is the ability. We don't just hire somebody new into a spot. We open that spot up for people who are interested in changing shifts for whatever reason. But no, if you're on first shift, you're on first shift all the time. Same with seconds and same with thirds. I worked a schedule when I mentioned being at the at Camp Lejeune in the Provost Marshal's office, and before I started as the special action team leader, I was one of the platoon leaders in just a road platoon, like a shift of military policemen. And we worked a schedule where we would work 2 weeks of days, 12s, and 2 weeks of nights, 12s. I was tired and run down and not fit and not super healthy for a young guy the whole time, because as soon as your body adjusts to one, you have to go to the other.
Yeah.
And the troops liked it because all of those kids who were on the East Coast, one week they'd get 72 hours off, so they get a 3-day chunk off, and then the next week they'd get 96 hours off, so a 4-day chunk as we rotated. So they loved it. I hated it. It was so hard on my body, and I, again, one of those lessons learned when you're a younger person, you file it away, and so I would hate to put other folks through that, the rotating shift schedule. And I'm lucky here because we have a lieutenant on the third shift who's retired Air Force. He's been on the night shift his whole Air Force career. He loves it. He's not necessarily fond of hanging around the bosses and being around when all the bosses are around. So that's perfect. He doesn't need to be babysat, and he doesn't need to look at me, and I don't need to look at him, and he does a good job and he handles it. And for the most part, his third shifters would prefer to be on third shift. And here at the hospital, we make that a little more palatable because there is a shift differential. So the public safety officers on the second shift, for the second half of their shift, they're making shift diff. And then those third shifters are making more money for the whole 8 hours. So again, that folks who are financially driven and folks who don't necessarily want to see the boss's face every day, they kind of gravitate toward the third shift, and that's okay.
Excellent. It's funny. It kind of reminds me of my experience. I remember there was a period in time where I'd use some vacation time to work some events, because I used to do a bit of event security as well. It was during the film festival, and I had committed to doing 16-hour shifts for the whole thing.
Wow.
Which, it wasn't. I was fine the first couple of days. The biggest part was it was a huge shift because I went from day shift to like an overnight. It was a really awkward shift, and I remember coming home after the one day. I pull up to my house number and I look up and I'm like, this isn't my house. I was on the wrong street. And then the one of the final days that I had done that, I remember I pulled up in front of my house. It was 4:01 a.m. And I just remember blinking, and then it was 5:01 a.m. Like I fell asleep for exactly 1 hour. I was like, okay, you know what? I can't do this anymore. And I stopped doing that after that time.
Yeah, it's really hard. I had a similar experience when I worked at the Olympics in Atlanta. I got a series of amazingly lucky breaks that have fed my career success since then. But I was working a 12-hour shift at the International Broadcast Center for NBC, and it was a 2-hour commute to get there and be sure I was early. Early's on time and on time is late. So it was a 2 hour, I had to leave 2 hours early to be sure I was there, and then it was 2 hours home. So it was a full 16-hour day. It wasn't a 16-hour shift, but it was a 16-hour day. And then I, shower and shave and get dressed again and do all that. And, I remember just at the end of it, just being literally bone tired. And I when I think about that, I think about our frontline healthcare workers. We've really been lucky with COVID in the pediatric healthcare space, because although lots of kids are now testing positive, most of them are asymptomatic. A very small percentage have had to be hospitalized. So, and fortunately, our adult healthcare partners here in the Miami Valley region have been able to manage the two kind of surges that they've gotten. They haven't had to overflow to us, although we're prepared to do that. And I just think about our healthcare workers. The Olympics last 19 days. They've been doing this day on, stay on for week after week after month after month. And, I wasn't in a life or death situation at the Olympics. They're literally dealing with life and death, not only their patients, but also their own every day. And I just can't imagine what they're going through, especially in the hot spots, especially in those places where they're running out of ICU beds and ventilators. And, I remember my time doing that for a short period of time, and I just can't imagine how bone tired they must be every day.
It's definitely a really challenging time right now. I kind of want to shift focus back to the training topic now.
Okay.
You had mentioned that you had fully sold out to an in-house training program, which is amazing now, and some of the benefits of that you mentioned were being able to actually complete more training, which is a huge benefit as well. It's hard when you're not getting the opportunity to try those skills except for on an annual basis.
Right.
So kudos for all that you're doing with your program. Now, I was just curious, is there anything else that you've implemented to make training work in that 24/7 environment?
Well, I think the roll call training has been a big part of it for us. I talked about our roll call and pass down process. A lot of times in the Marine Corps, we called them hip pocket classes. It's a class you got in your hip pocket. You get 15 minutes of downtime waiting on a truck. You're teaching. You're not letting your guys just sit around and be bored. You're making them better. And so a lot of times, the non-high liability, or I guess that would make them low liability issues, can be taught in little bitty bites, 15 minutes here or a half hour there. So quite frequently, we can get those things trained either in roll call or with a 30-minute bite or even an hour bite just before roll call. So we're not having to bring people in on a day off. We're not having to bring them in that much early. We're not having to pay that much overtime. But because we now have instructors, if there's not an instructor in that thing on their shift, then the shift they're touching will have an instructor in that thing. And so that person can transition, teach during roll call or for a half hour, an hour before roll call. And that's cut down on our number of training days, but still allowed us to get all those issues in. About the only thing we really can't do that with is CPI, which is our de-escalation training. We did create a CPI instructor within the public safety space, and that's a subject that's taught here in the hospital with a cross-cultural and cross-specialty team. So he's just one of the CPI instructors. But when our folks go, depending on what they're getting for that 1 or 3 days of training, there's a friendly face in the room. So they're getting it not just from a public safety officer, they're getting it from a nurse, they're getting it from somebody in behavioral health, they're getting it from an array of folks, but that public safety officer is there too.
Awesome. Now, so obviously we've talked about a lot of the advantages of having in-house trainers. Was there anything that's come out of this that's been a success that you maybe didn't expect, or something that surprised you?
Well, one thing that we actually did expect that has come true is that, there's not a lot of movement at the top of our public safety department. We've got folks who are good at what they do and they like where they work. They've already been shot at and rolled around the dirt, and they realize that wasn't as cool as they thought. And that's not happening here a lot, which is great. So there's not a lot of upward mobility within our department. So one of the benefits to creating instructors at the officer level and at the sergeant level was that without being able to give a promotion, without being able to give a raise, those people were able to get some career advancement. They were seen within not just the public safety department, but within the hospital then as the duty expert. And, once you're the duty expert, you're the duty expert, whatever that specialty is. So that has been good for their careers, and it's been good for their personal and professional development without costing us on the bottom line, which has really helped. So we did foresee that. And that was pleasant. One thing that I was not smart enough to foresee, unfortunately, was that some of our younger folks who had not necessarily yet been shot at and rolled around in the dirt and thought that might be a cool thing to go do, they were able to take their new instructor certifications and their year or 2 years now of instructor experience, and that made them more competitive in the local law enforcement market. And they were able to join organizations where either they thought they would make more money long term, or where there would be more career advancement, or both. So that was certainly a negative, and we lost a couple really, really good folks who were very valuable to our department. One in particular was an instructor in multiple things because he came to us with some instructor experience.
Right.
But we've still, even though we lost that and those losses hurt, we've still gained much more, I think, by having the in-house training program than what we've lost.
Right. And it's just a consequence of having a strong program, right? You are going to have people who do leave, and it's just a part of it. But I think it speaks to the quality of the program that you have when people are able to leave to do something a little bit more progressive, or, something that just falls better in alignment with their skill set, maybe even.
I hope you're right. And one of the things that we try very hard, we work very hard on our end to leave with a good taste in everybody's mouth. I've never been one to hold people back. I've been lucky. I've only ever had one person try to hold me back in my career for their own personal benefit, and we found a way around that. But I've never been one to do that. And again, partly because it was done to me, and I didn't ever want to be that kind of leader. We've had one person who left already come back because they realized the grass wasn't greener. We've had somebody else interview somewhere else and say, no way in the world I'm going to work there. I like it here. So, that's awesome. It is awesome. And that's really a testament to Andre and to our lieutenants that they set the tone, that it's the kind of place where not only might you want to come back, but you can come back because we leave that door open. If you leave in good graces and you have a positive feeling about us, there's nothing preventing you. You just come back more experienced, with different skill sets and different experiences that you didn't have when you left. So in most cases, people come back better if they're able to come back. So
they come back more experienced. Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. Now, is there anything else that I haven't asked you about yet that you'd like to discuss?
Well, first, I want to say that you really don't sound like a Canuck until it's the OU sound. Um, when you said house and about, that's the only time I hear it. Other than that, you could definitely pass as an American. Um, well, I'm just fascinated by leadership. And, I mentioned earlier the two guys that I hated who were my leaders. And, I was a Marine. I was respectful. I didn't show my disregard for them, but I show it every day when I'm not the kind of leader they were. I think that young leaders or young potential leaders, people who think they have leadership in them or who want to learn how to be a leader, I think they do themselves a disservice when they think that it's only possible to learn from a billionaire entrepreneur or from somebody who is a good leader or somebody they like. Like I said, as my dad said, you can learn something from any idiot. And negative leadership examples are still leadership examples, and they help you learn what not to do and what not to be. I've had several instances where I've taken over within an organization where I was a subordinate leader, and then I've taken over within that organization. And, people were shocked that I didn't lead the same way we had been led before. And it kind of threw them off sometimes because we're not going to do it that same way. That wasn't my idea of what leadership is. And I think that, people also make a mistake. I've heard people say that, he's a born leader, that leaders are born and not made. And I'm not sure that's true. I think there are some people who gravitate more naturally to it, but there are other people who, I've had really good leaders who were very introverted and who weren't very outgoing and who weren't really magnanimous, but they were really good leaders. So I think, if you're willing to be open-minded, and if you're willing to learn from both positive and negative influences, and most of all, if you're willing to hire and surround yourself with people who are smarter than you and or better at a particular thing that you're not good at, they're strong in your area of weakness. I think that folks, I've seen folks who, I won't use the vulgar Marine Corps phrase, but who weren't really good leaders. Let's just put it that way. Who have become leaders because they wanted to be, and they tried to be, and they learned. And I'm not always necessarily impressed by somebody who tells me, they read this leadership book and that leadership book, and now they're ready to be a leader. I think that's great, and I think you can feed a lot of those positive examples into your brain. But as Churchill said, success is moving rapidly from one failure to another without a loss of enthusiasm. If that's the measure of success, I've been successful, Brent, let me tell you. But
You and me both.
like that, you don't get it right all the time, and you make mistakes, and you feel bad about things, and people anger you, and you get your emotions involved, and it's not a perfect thing. But if you're consistently trying to improve, then I think that lots of people can be leaders. And I differentiate the word leadership from management. The way the Marine Corps looks at that is that you lead people and you manage assets and things. So, I manage budgets, and I manage equipment, and I manage offices and officers and, all that. Positions. I lead people. And I think if young leaders will look at it in that light, that people can't be managed and they shouldn't be manipulated, they should be led, that they'll have a much more successful leadership career, and they'll also enjoy it a lot, because there are a lot of things about leadership that are tough.
You brought up young leaders there, and it just led to another question that I want to ask you. There's one book, one of the ones behind me actually, 360 Leader by John Maxwell. John Maxwell has done a lot of work in the leadership space.
Mm-hmm.
That was one that I read when I was a frontline guard, and I think it was really helpful because it talks about basically being a leader without necessarily having the title or position, but how you're able to have influence. Do you have any recommendations for either books or any resources that will help the development of the young leader?
Well, I do love reading the biographies and the autobiographies of the people that I consider successful. And I don't think you can go wrong there, because even if you realize that person is very different from you, there are character traits, and there are qualities, and there are quotes, and there are attitudes that you can take with you that can help make you a better leader. So, I'm a fan of Abraham Lincoln. who talk about, going from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. He lost every election he was ever in, just about, except the presidency. I love Churchill. I'm also fascinated by, I'm a big sports fan. I was an athlete. My kids have all been athletic. I'm fascinated by learning from coaches. Many coaches have a great deal more control, especially at the college and high school level, than we do as leaders in the healthcare security space. But there's still a lot that can be learned about attention to detail and about focus and about keeping people motivated all the time. And that's something that I actually am working on. I don't think I've done a really good job of that through COVID. I spent 12 weeks in our HCC every day, which is part of why Andre got promoted, because he ran public safety without me for 12 weeks and proved that he could do it. So thank God they promoted me instead of letting me go. Right. But, I think that there's a lot that can be learned from those things. And my favorite book is it's really a business book, but it is, there's just so much there for leaders, is Jim Collins' Good to Great.
Right.
I think I think I see that over your left shoulder, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, it's here.
Yeah, I thought I saw it. So, the idea of the BHAG, the big hairy goal,
Hairy audacious goal. Yeah.
and how you can, if you can really focus on three areas. And I'm somebody who thinks in triangles. I think in 3-word groups a lot. If you can find those 3 areas of focus that are most important to you for this week or this month or this year, and if those 3 things overlap in the center somewhere, like a Venn diagram, if there's that overlapping in the center which is the sweet spot, or the BHAG, as Jim Collins calls it, I think that you're destined for success if you can figure that out. And the other thing that I took from that book that is actually on my whiteboard behind me, I don't know if you can see it, but his quote that you have to confront the brutal facts. That was I put that in people's minds very early in the COVID process, and we tried very hard to do that. We didn't play pie in the sky. We didn't hope for the best. We prepared for the worst. And I think that as a result, one of the things I'm the proudest of is that we have limited spread within the hospital. We don't know of a single employee who's become positive within the hospital. So we've done a really good job of protecting our employees. Fortunately, our supply chain guys done a great job of making sure we had the right PPE all the time. But I think that's as a result of our confronting the brutal facts every day. How's that for a long-winded answer about a book?
That's a great answer. Now, as we wrap up here, do you have a special message for the Healthcare Security Cast community?
Oh man, I want to thank everybody. I mentioned Dan Yaross, but Ed Casey, who recently retired from Cincinnati Children's, is a true old-fashioned gentleman, and Ed was far more kind to this brash, former Marine than he probably had to be. But within the IAHSS community and those folks who are in healthcare security who aren't part of the organization, everybody who's been helpful to me, I want to thank. And I want to thank you. I mean, this is a great opportunity. And in the midst of this craziness, the fact that you have given us a vehicle that helps us all to learn from each other is a wonderful thing. We can't get together. We can't break bread and have an adult beverage and tell stories and kick it around. So this is a great way for us to all learn from each other. And, I would offer to anybody who listens to this, this will probably be your lowest listenership in all of your podcasts, but
I doubt that.
Anybody who needs help or who wants an introduction to somebody I'm connected with that is smarter than me, or just needs a sounding board. Sometimes we just need to say things out loud in an environment that's not judgmental, where people aren't going to take it as a decision and they're not going to walk away saying, boy, that's the dumbest guy I ever heard. Just having somebody who's not involved in the situation, who has no emotions around it, to provide a sounding board. So I would be thrilled for any of your listeners to reach out to me for any of those things.
Perfect. Well, that segues nicely to my next question. What are the best ways to connect with you?
Well, as you know, I can always be found on LinkedIn. I'm sometimes slow, but I always respond. eventually. I may be sitting on the sidelines of a high school soccer game or something before I get to all the answers, but I'll always respond. When I joined LinkedIn, there were so many Mark Moores that I used my middle name as a differentiator. So I think I'm the only Mark Kendall Moore on LinkedIn. And if folks want to reach out to me, I'd love to connect and talk and chat. And I can't tell you how many folks I've met through LinkedIn who I've then been able to provide an introduction to someone that was really helpful to them in their career, or that I've been able to do something like this with you, presentations, instruction, training. And my favorite thing is when I actually get to meet folks in person at conferences or conventions, or because I'm going to be in their town or they're going to be in mine. That's always fun. And I'm rarely fooled. You know, if you're a good person on LinkedIn, for the most part, you're a good person in person. That's been my experience, at least.
Yeah, I can say the same. I can share the same experience. I've met some really great people on the platform, and it's always good when you can do things like we're doing right now, or just be able to be a resource to each other. It's awesome, and it's great to have that ability to connect with people, just not even just locally, but globally. There's
For
just so many
sure.
people out there.
For sure. And it's such a collaborative little niche in our, overarching security profession that it makes it a lot of fun.
Awesome. And speaking of which, this has been a lot of fun. I appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us today. And I know I definitely benefited from this conversation. I hope everybody else has as well.
Thanks, Brent. I appreciate it.
And this concludes episode 45 of the Healthcare Security Cast, meaning that we're only 5 episodes away from episode 50. In advance of our 50th episode, we're doing some contests and giveaways. Right now, we're giving away an IAHSS membership. Check us out on social media. Go on LinkedIn, search the hashtag HSC giveaway to find out more details. Also, join our text platform, My Community, by texting START to 647-372-2042 for some exclusive giveaways. Again, that number is 647-372-2042. Text START to join. Thanks again for joining us on the Healthcare Security Cast. Be sure to check us out on social media. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Join us next week as we have some special episodes around the IAHSS AC&E. Until next time, stay safe and take care.